Question is that the bill be now read the second time. The honourable member for Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very pleased to be rising to speak on this bill today. It's a tangible step forward. It's tangible progress in delivering on the recommendations that were made in the Commission of Inquiry final report. And it's an incredibly important piece of that puzzle. So to be here today feels significant that we're progressing this, and it can be given effect to as soon as possible. I know that those out there in the community who we acknowledge and thank for their contribution to getting the Commission of Inquiry underway and then ensuring that it was a significant piece of work that delivered us such an extensive suite of recommendations with the intention to make real change. Those people that we owe such a lot to for what they gave and what it cost them personally, whether they were victim survivors, whether they were family and carers around those people, whether they were, importantly, whistleblowers from within our state service. All of them did so much, and now it's our turn to deliver on it. So this is an important piece of that puzzle, and I hope that they feel that we're now finally stepping up to the plate to move things forward at our end based on what they've provided us. So, Mr. President, I appreciate the briefing provided to us today from the staff and the department on the bill. Lots of questions were answered. I also know that this bill was well discussed in the other place and that many questions were put and answers received there, which was very clarifying. I particularly appreciate the member for Hobart's contribution we've just heard, which was quite an extensive one and covered a lot of areas. I'm not going to go into as much detail as the member for Hobart, but I do want to pick up on a few areas that will cross over with her remarks, because they're the ones I just want to pick out as important to have, I think, at the forefront of our mind, where there are still perhaps some areas of concern or unanswered questions here. I don't want that to take away from the fact, though, that I see this bill as quite faithfully giving effect to what was intended in the recommendation by the Commissioners on this matter of an implementation monitor. And in some ways it goes even a little further than what was explicitly in the recommendation, and that's really pleasing to see. Unfortunately, probably in one important way, it doesn't quite align, and that's been touched on, and I'll also talk about that, the matter of the independence of the entity. But overall, it's a faithful, I think, vehicle to progress the recommendation made by the Commissioners. And of course, it's clear why we need to contemplate an implementation monitor that sits distinctly independently from the government and those within the bureaucracy who are implementing recommendations. The Commissioners made it very clear in their final report that we have a pattern here in this state. We have a pattern that's well established, where we have reviews, we have investigations, inquiries and the like, and they come out with recommendations, and those recommendations then follow a couple of well-trodden paths. One of them might be to be put on a shelf and not get implemented at all. That's one outcome we've seen again and again, and the Commissioners refer to that in the report. And that's utterly unacceptable. It's absolutely, actually, insult to injury when you go to the trouble of a review or an investigation or an inquiry. It's undertaken in good faith. Experts who are involved in it deliver thoughtful, evidence-based recommendations from that process, and then they sit there and lapse on a shelf. That would be criminal for us to see happen in relation to the Commission of Inquiry recommendations. Hence, we need a monitor. Another pathway, though, that we've seen again and again too, I think, is where from the same sorts of inquiries or reviews or investigations, we have recommendations, and they're fairly structural things or bureaucratic things that are recommended, and it's a bit like window dressing. So departments or agencies readily take their laundry list of things, and the government readily gets up in this place and reports on this laundry list of things that are being done and given effect to, and yet there is no outcome achieved that was the intent. We haven't actually seen reform of outcomes, just busy work in relation to recommendations made. And that also is an utter tragedy when we see that. And in fact, it's incredibly harmful because it actually provides the implication that progress has been made and perhaps, for example, safety has been enhanced or put in place. But if that is not true, and what we've just pointed to is a big long list of busy work, then we have actually left people in a worse position than they were before because we've effectively gaslit them. Yeah. And unacceptable. And there's a particular example of that I will draw attention to here because it's relevant in this place when we're now talking about ensuring we avoid doing it with the Commission of Inquiry. And that was in the area of youth justice. We saw a noetic report provided from experts from a group called Noetic in 2016, I believe it was, around youth justice in this state. And it talked about options. And the key option was to close AYDC. The government chose not to do that, but the other option was to create a more therapeutic environment there. And we then saw years of the responsible minister, who for a lot of that time is still the responsible minister now, get up in places like Parliament, but also in the media or to other stakeholders in the public domain, and run through lists of actions being taken to create a more therapeutic environment at AYDC. From the time of that report in 2016 through until let's draw a line at when the Commission of Inquiry was called in 2021. There's a 5-year period there. And there would be happy reporting of progress being made of creating a more therapeutic environment. And yet, Mr. President, what we know now from the Commission of Inquiry is that across that whole period of time, children in that environment continue to be brutalised and abused, emotionally, sexually, physically. So we were given the impression that improvement was occurring. But now we know, through another process, that it wasn't. Certainly not anywhere near sufficiently to the intention when those things were recommended through that noetic report. So that is why we absolutely, and why the Commissioners took great care to identify this as such an important piece of the puzzle in ensuring real change from the Commission of Inquiry process. We cannot have ministers get up and read out laundry lists of busy work being done that actually are having no tangible impact and delivering no greater protection to vulnerable children. It's, I think, heartening to see that the Commissioners looked to other jurisdictions and other similarly sensitive and complex areas of reform and sought to be informed by models for monitoring implementation that might be worth considering here, and found such a model in Victoria with the Family Violence Implementation Monitor. And I think there's always a greater level of comfort if we can look, when we're developing a new mechanism such as this, if we can look to a similar model elsewhere and see that it has been used and has been regarded as being effective. The Commissioners provided that alongside their recommendation as good guidance. And I think that that's incredibly positive. And I recognise there are ways that we have followed that model, and some ways we've diverted, but that's natural too, because it's a circumstance all of its own that we are also creating this for here in our state. So I'm pleased, Mr. President, that we're here and we're debating this bill, and I look forward to it passing, which I hope and believe it will, and being given effect to. as the member for Launceston commented, the person who is recruited into this role will be absolutely crucial for its ultimate impact and success. And no doubt that's going to be a recruitment that is undertaken with great care and sensitivity. So the other side of that is we know from the bill and from the briefings and discussions we've had that it is in fact Parliament, both houses of Parliament, that provide the oversight to this role ultimately, and to whom this role is answerable. And so we will all play a role in an ongoing way to ensure that there is success in this model and that we are ensuring accountability to the person who's undertaking this key role as monitor. Mr. President, as I said, I won't go through exhaustively. I appreciate the contribution provided by the member for Hobart, covering many areas. I do want to pick up, though, and repeat a couple of them because I think they are also remain somewhat concerning. And one is around the matter of independence for the independent monitor role. The commissioners were quite clear about it sitting outside of the state service and being able to be an agency unto itself. That hasn't occurred. And my understanding is that essentially establishing a separate agency would then impose on that agency the need to, as an agency, undertake various activities, reporting, auditing, risk management activities and the like, bureaucratic things. And it was deemed that for an agency that may ultimately be half a dozen people in terms of its size and staffing, is a lot of bureaucracy to put around it in and of itself. There was some cost potentially involved in that. The figure mentioned, I thought, didn't sound like an unreasonable investment to make, quite frankly. I'm not going to mention the figure that was mentioned in the briefing because I don't know, we weren't provided with a breakdown of that and I can't verify that as the absolute figure, but we were provided with a figure for what it might cost to put that reporting and auditing and risk management, etc., bureaucracy around the agency if it were to stand alone. Quite frankly, I think for the quantum of what that might have been, it would have been worth it to do it. It's a small investment in the big scheme of things, actually. No one would have noticed if in our state budget we spent that in order to make sure this was a separate independent agency genuinely. However, that hasn't been done in this bill. To my mind, it's not a reason not to support the bill. I just find it unfortunate. And it will be interesting to see going forward as this Parliament interacts with the monitor and with the operations of the monitor and the staff associated with the role as well, and particularly as the joint committee relating to the implementation of Commission recommendations also interacts quite distinctly, I would think, with this monitor role and those around it. It will be interesting to see if we can identify any issues around independence, given that rather than be an entirely separate agency sitting outside of the state service, it will be part of the Department of Justice. Now, given that decision, and while I would actually have preferred a different decision was made, I can see efforts are being made within that to try to ensure a degree of independence to the greatest extent possible. So I understand that people who may be employed to work under and with the monitor role will be state servants. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be seconded from elsewhere. I understand from the briefings that they can be employed in an open way from wherever. It's just that when they come to work for the monitor, they will become state servants employed by the Department of Justice and then directed into the role, whatever role they've been employed to do under the monitor functions. It's not ideal. Certainly when I first read the bill, the section of the bill that refers to this on a quick reading, almost reads like they might even be part-time, doing other things in the state service and working for the monitor. However, when you read it more, when you read it more carefully, you can see, and we were reassured in the briefing that that's not the case. There is no expectation that people would be working in other state service roles while also working in these roles, just that they will be employed. Their status will be one of it being a state servant. The thing that is also concerning, and again, it's because we've got form in this state when it comes to our statutory roles and statutory entities. The thing that's also concerning is appropriate and adequate funding. Now, to some extent, the bill explicitly protects the remuneration of the monitor and ensures that influence, I guess, from the government of the day or from the state service can't be brought to bear on the monitor through manipulation of remuneration for the monitor. But that doesn't necessarily reassure us about remuneration for undertaking the full functions under the full staffing that might be there. It's probably worth the leader, if possible, in summing up, making some remarks about how we might have confidence and then how we might be able then to scrutinise the appropriate and adequate funding for the entirety of the functions. My understanding is we'll be scrutinising that in budget time, potentially as a separate line item. The monitor presumably will appear in budget estimates scrutiny, and I would hope be able to be interacted with directly by the committee, the relevant committee undertaking the budget estimates process. However, we have to flag right here, right now, the constant refrain we hear from many of our other statutory entities here, oversight entities of similar nature, is that they're not funded adequately to undertake their role. And we know that actually that is actually a failure of integrity here. It's a failure of our integrity systems and mechanisms here, because it's almost worse to have an integrity entity of some sort in place, an oversight entity of some sort in place, who on paper and under statute has a role to play and then can't fully or to an adequate degree do that role and undertake and deliver the outcomes of that role because of a lack of funding, which often ends up looking like a lack of staff. That is entirely unacceptable. It gives the veneer that we have appropriate mechanisms in place while in fact failing to deliver on the expected outcomes of those mechanisms. So it would be absolutely horrifying to see that play out in this circumstance. Two of the other areas that I also retain some concerns about, which have been mentioned, but I'll reiterate them here as concerns, relate to the issue of information being able to be requested and called for by the monitor, but then denied on the basis, for example, of privilege of some sort. And the member for Hobart mentioned the Integrity Commission's submission made on the draft bill, raising this as an issue. And of course, we know that this is an issue we have even ourselves here as a parliament and as a chamber, where we have no mechanism in place to adjudicate disputes about claims of privilege. So no one's arguing, I don't believe, that the monitor should be able to request privileged information. The issue here is that if the monitor requests information and then an agency denies that request on the basis that the information is privileged, if there's a question there and the monitor believes perhaps that may not be the case, how can the monitor prosecute a challenge to that denial of information? There's nothing here that I can see in the bill that provides for how a dispute of that kind over a claim of privilege can be adjudicated. We don't have one here in the Parliament to offer as a mechanism either. It's problematic, I think. It's problematic on this area in particular because we know that information has been hidden and has been disappeared and has been inappropriately, I think, obscured through things like claims of privilege in the past. And the Commission itself identified numerous occasions where things just weren't actually appropriately reported or made visible or transparent or provided. So I remain concerned about that issue. It will be one, I think, that this place, as the oversight body of the Monitor, and certainly the committee, the joint committee that will be also interacting with the Monitor quite closely, I think will be looking to that carefully and seeing whether there's anything more that needs to be done down the track. That's just a guess at this stage, but I suspect that's what's going to happen. I was particularly pleased to have advice provided through the briefings, but also when I looked at the debate and the discussion in the other place, to that an area that I was quite concerned about appears to have been addressed. And that area was around where this entity could seek legal advice and whether it would be constrained to seeking legal advice only through the offices of the Solicitor General, Office of the Solicitor General. If that had been the case, and when I first was reading the material in the bill, I thought perhaps we're going to see something here that would be unfortunate, that it would be constrained to that source of illegal advice, but in fact, it's incredibly pleasing to hear that in the briefing, and perhaps it can be confirmed as well, that this entity will actually be free to seek legal advice where it chooses to seek that advice. It will not be constrained.
Through you, Mr. President, that is correct.
Yes, will not be constrained to only utilising advice from the OSG, and it will not have to consult with the Treasurer or the Attorney General in order to go and seek legal advice elsewhere that it may choose.
Yep, that is correct.
Thank you for confirming that, Leader. That's particularly important. One of the other areas that I felt was perhaps a little on the light side was, and various people who made submissions on the draft bill raised this. They talked about the fact that there were no offences or penalties for not providing information or not responding to this Monitor. And while I understand that there's an argument that those wouldn't be appropriate to have because this isn't an investigatory body, it's a monitoring body. So it doesn't necessarily need powers to call for things, and then that would need powers then that would need and warrant there being offences or penalties for not responding. I do think it's important that we understand and that there is that it is understood actually throughout the state service and the bureaucracies that a failure to comply with a request from this Monitor or to fall short in full and transparent interactions with this Monitor should have some negative outcome for that agency or that state servant doing that. And the reason I say that is that at best it looks like it will be reported in an annual report that a request was made and no response was forthcoming, or a less than comprehensive response was forthcoming. Now, being reported in an annual report is no terrible outcome, really. It's no penalty. It's not really particularly negative. There's no consequence to it. And that's concerning. I can see circumstances in which the pain of being named in an annual report, which we can probably assess as relatively small, certainly wouldn't outweigh the pain that might be there if something was comprehensively provided that might otherwise they might prefer to keep quietly hidden. Now that sounds conspiratorial, Mr. President, to some extent, which is a shame. It also sounds like I'm assuming the worst of our public service, which, let's be clear, for so many people in our public service, that would be absolutely unfortunate to be assuming the worst, because we know so many of them are doing their best and delivering such great service and outcomes to our state. However, we also know, because of the Commission of Inquiry, that repeatedly and in systematic and systemic ways across many agencies, that has not been the case here. We have had state servants fail in their duty again and again, not just as one bad apple, not just as one-off oversights or oopsies. We have seen the Commission has identified systemic failures. Because that's the basis on which we're working, that's what we are trying to change. And that's why I feel like being named in an annual report is a fairly weak outcome for any time we may see a failure of full and frank and transparent and comprehensive engagement with this monitor. I don't have a solution to suggest for it, Mr. President. And I know, of course, we would stand up and say we have a State Service Code of Conduct. We have all sorts of ways that the State Service is understood and by convention meant to behave. And would that we could fully feel confident on the basis of that. Would that we could, Mr. President. But actually this bill is here because we haven't been able to be fully confident of that. So I'm concerned about that issue. And it will be one to monitor over time as we see how people do respond to requests from the monitor for information and to the sorts of investigations and looking into things that the monitor is going to be doing. I look forward to what I hope is a fairly not hasty by any means, but a relatively quick recruitment, I hope. I hope we can find someone fabulous for this role and get them in place as quick as possible so that they can begin the work. Developing a framework for a start, which will underpin their monitoring function, is one of the first tasks that the bill lays out, and to be done within 12 months. And that will be incredibly important to see. The consultation that goes into that will be absolutely crucial to ensuring that it's comprehensive and it's effective. I know that it will likely go to the principles that will underpin the work that the monitor's going to do, and some had suggested in submissions that the principles should be in the bill, but actually I think they can be responsive and dynamic within a framework context. So they will be all really pleasing to see play out and be put in place over this next 12 months. Mr. President, that covers the areas I wanted to point to and highlight as some of the concerns I still hold around areas relating to this bill and the monitor and the entity that is going to be created by it. But I certainly want to conclude by reiterating how incredibly positive it is to be here giving effect to this very crucial recommendation from the Commission of Inquiry. And I'm so pleased to see that we aren't just going to be implementing recommendations with no actual oversight and consequence to them not being given effect to. This monitor will be the way we can assure ourselves here in this place, as representatives of our communities, that real change is occurring. And we need to, at all times, keep at the forefront of our awareness that when we talk about real change occurring in this space, what we're talking about is children being safer. Children in all parts of government institutions across this state, children being safer.
That should be just safe, full stop.
Safe, full stop, absolutely. Yeah. But it's about that outcome. So it's not just about busy activity. It's not just about a laundry list of tasks to tick off. It's about, have we actually made kids safe here in Tasmania? And I hope that this work undertaken by the monitor will be able to give us confidence to be able to say yes to that.
So while the honourable member's on her feet, through you, Mr. President, we have one more speaker who is not going to speak for very long that I'm aware of. Then we'll move to the committee stage, and I don't think that will take a long time, but members may know if they're going to ask a lot of questions. Can I just please have an indication? Do you want to stop for a dinner break, or will we push on? It's my personal preference to push on, but what do members think? push on.
It's okay, through you, Mr President, it's okay for those who've had a break at lunchtime. Some of us haven't. So I don't want to be going to 8, 9 o'clock without a break. I can tell you that.
7, 8, 9. Perhaps if you... Pardon?
Well, committee stage often does take a while in this place, through you, Mr President, because the member for Hobart's new and hasn't experienced many bills of any complexity going through here yet.
No, none.
We do the work during committee stage here, and a lot of times the members do have questions, and committee stage can take quite a while.
Can I
so
ask
just to be clear.
Can I ask the member to please adjourn the debate?
Yes.
Or do we start committee stage and see how we're going?
Once we're in committee, we're not going to want to go out.
I think we need to probably formalise it and adjourn the debate and see what the mood of the council is. So then that's formalised. Because
Yes, please adjourn the debate.
Mr President, can I move to adjourn the debate?
the question is the debate stand adjourned. Those of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No.
I think the ayes have it.